Can you see that?
That is beautiful. Notepad++.
Okay. I have the wrong. Sorry, I have the wrong ones. For some reason, that was okay. Let me share the other one.
Now that's the one I use too, because I love the fact that Notepad++, if you don't save the file and your computer crashes, it saves it. I think that alone is the greatest thing about Notepad++.
That's the workshop there. Okay. So I am trying to share the other one. For some reason, that was listed as screen 1, even though that's my auxiliary screen. So bear with me a second.
Okay, we do see the slides, how to use a complete JavaScript tool chain in your Shiny development. So
great, we're ready to go then. Okay.
Beautiful.
That's still coming across?
Yeah, it's perfect. And presenter mode.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks you all for joining. It's a lovely day here. Hopefully it is where you are as well. And I'm really excited about this conference. This is my 3rd year at Arna Pharma. This is actually my first time doing a workshop, so I'm pretty pumped about this. I'd like to start off by saying that I've designed this workshop to sort of accommodate both modes of participation. So if you'd like to just sit back and treat this as a demo, that's perfectly fine. Everything, all the materials that I'm going to present today, they're all available through GitHub. If you'd like to just watch today, you can work through the exercises later. You can take the exercises and use those for templates for your own development as well. That's fine. If you'd like to try to work through the exercises now, that's great too. You'll probably get the most out of the workshop that way. But as Phil said, even though we have a sort of a cloud-based, virtual environment, it's not completely working. You'll have to tweak a few things to get it to work, which I'll, just reach out if you'd like to do that. But I would recommend trying this on your own computer setup. You probably have the best luck there if you have the requirements. And what you're going to need to actually run through this right now is that obviously a computer, it can be a PC, laptop, a VM. This isn't going to work through RStudio server because, unless you have like a cloud-based version of VS Code. But any operating system should work. Obviously, you'll need RStudio. You'll need Node.js, which is a JavaScript package manager. Well, it's more than that, but that's what we're using it for today. You'll need the VS Code editor and a Get client. These are all freely available pieces of software. So if you don't have them now, want to do the workshop later, no worries there. I expect if you are running the workshop, if you're actually running through the exercises on your own computers today, I'm sure there are technical issues. As Phil said, they'll try to help you troubleshoot. One particular thing that may be a little tricky is that if you are behind a corporate firewall, we're going to have to pull down some JavaScript packages. And sometimes that doesn't work behind a firewall. You have to utilize your proxy server. There is an article, and let me actually share the link for that. Just bear with me for a second. I'm going to chat it to you. It's a really short article, so you actually might be able to go through it. Let me put the link in the chat. But it is something that you may face. I face this working behind a firewall too. It's about a 3-paragraph article though. Okay, so let's go ahead and I wanted to go ahead and get things set up. I think even if you're just sort of attending in a more passive way, go ahead and pulling down the code, I think would be helpful. So the first thing we're going to do is open up a terminal. So I'm on a Windows machine. I'm going to type a command C or just CMD in the start box here. If you're on a Mac, you can, your app will be called a terminal. You can type command spacebar, enter that, and then type the terminal command. It'll open that up for you. If you're on Linux, I don't need to tell you how to get a terminal. So if you have a terminal open, go ahead and go to a place where you're going to put the code. So I'm just going to put this in a temp, cd temp. This is going to be my working directory for this workshop. Okay. So we want to go ahead and clone the Git repo. Let me put this link in the chat so you don't have to try to copy it from the screen. All right, bear with me a second. I'm just sort of getting used to using Zoom again. Okay. So there's the command in the chat. Let me do the same thing on mine. It should be a pretty quick download. If you're planning on working through the exercises during the workshop, I want to go ahead and pull down the JavaScript packages you'll need, because this can take a little bit of time. And I'm going to go through some introductory slides. And while I'm going through the slides, you can be installing these packages. So you want to execute several commands. So first off, you want to cd into the rpharma directory that was created when you cloned the Git repo. Okay. And then I'm going to type yarn install. Okay. This is going to pull down a bunch of JavaScript. Now, when I installed a Node on my machine, yarn came with it. If you have Node but don't have yarn, you can also just use the npm command. So just type npm and then install, and that will do the same thing. This is going to take a few minutes to load or to run. While that's happening, I'm going to go back over to the slide presentation, and we'll come back to this. So let me just introduce myself really briefly. My name is David Hall. I'm a director of data science at Novartis. Even though I have a fancy title, director, I actually do hands-on data science work for the most part. A lot of my work involves visual analytic apps and APIs. So I use Shiny and R a lot, as well as other languages like JavaScript, Java, and Python. I do a fair amount of general data science as well, building models and things like that. I've worked at a number of other companies in industries adjacent to pharma, like CROs. I worked in ag biotech for a while. I worked for a software company. I started working with Shiny a couple of years ago. Prior to that, most of my career I've developed web applications, and for part of my career I was a web developer. So I sort of came into Shiny already knowing how to do web development. But I really like Shiny a lot. I think it brings a tremendous amount of value, even if you do have general web development skills. So the goals for this workshop, I have 3 goals here. The first is how to set up a proper JavaScript toolchain that is well integrated with your R toolchain. Okay. The second is to learn how to develop JavaScript inputs and outputs with this toolchain. And the third is to provide example code and jumping off points, so you can, code that you can sort of take with you and do additional research or use this as a starting point for your own development work. I'm going to cover a lot of different things today. And if you, for instance, don't really have any experience with React framework, you're not going to come out of a 2-hour, 3-hour workshop being an expert, obviously. But I hope that you'll get an overview and have some jumping off points where you can do additional investigation. All the tools that I covered today have great documentation. They're really popular tools. There's plenty of tutorial material for you to sort of do more deep dives on your own. A few disclaimers. So there's almost an infinite number of ways to develop software. There are a myriad of tools and packages and frameworks, and this landscape changes continuously and rapidly. So my intent here is to present a reasonable set of popular tools that work well together. But I'm not making a claim that these are necessarily the best individual components for your job. You may know of ones that are better, and you can share those in a chat or however. I'll be presenting a set of tools that work well together, basically. And they're reasonable choices for your projects. I'll try to provide individual help. Phil and a few other folks are here as well. But I do have to balance providing individual help with completing the material in a lot of time. So forgive me in advance if I can't, solve, every problem for you, during the workshop. So let me switch back over and see how the JavaScript packages are. Okay. So let me just skip back up to this slide here. There are two places we're going to have to download packages. The first one was in the top level directory of the source code. I'm going to now cd into this a folder called source react, and I'm going to type yarn install again there. There's a bunch more packages we have to pull down from there. Okay, and that'll take probably 5 minutes or so. But everything will be ready once we need. Okay, back to the slides then. Again, people who come into to Shiny, a lot of people who start with Shiny are data scientists, and they use Shiny because they can develop web applications without having to be an expert in HTML and JavaScript and CSS and things like that. And that's great. If you're a data scientist and you're focusing on modeling or visualizing data, you shouldn't have to be an expert in CSS or things like that. But even if you do have experience with sort of basic web development languages and platforms, Shiny, I use Shiny a lot, even though I pretty proficient in JavaScript, because it enables me to rapidly create certain types of analytic apps. It's just a really quick way to build, a fairly professional looking app that does some really cool stuff, really quickly. So I think it's a really valuable tool for anybody, regardless of your experience with web development. Obviously, it's a convenient way to tap into the power of R, through an app. There are other ways. You can create an API, for instance, but there's a lot to be said for that. So as everybody probably knows, your browser doesn't understand R code. At least not now. Maybe the future browsers will understand R code. Hopefully they will. But right now, we have to use things like Shiny to do the work for us. So the R functions that we use when we're writing Shiny applications ultimately generate code that the browser can understand. And that's namely HTML, CSS, JavaScript, as well as certain images. HTML is a language for content. This is how you put your content together. CSS is for layout and styling, and JavaScript for interactivity. Now, but I'll sort of roll all these up when I talk about certain client-side JavaScript development. Just note that I'm talking about not only JavaScript but also CSS and HTML as well. Now, you can do a lot of really cool stuff with Shiny, but ultimately the set of user experiences that you can create just by using R functions is really a very small subset of all the possible user experiences you can create using more basic web technologies, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So, oftentimes this is fine. What we get through Shiny and other packages, our packages, is enough. But I find that developing more complex applications, I have to go beyond what I get through R to create the user experience that people are asking me to provide for them. JavaScript can do a number of things in terms of increasing the user experience. We have a far greater range of designs available to us for user experiences and user interfaces. Obviously, greater levels of interactivity, more sort of, click and hover interactivity. We can also use JavaScript for better performance. There's certain operations that we may want to do client side. So rather than sending, a request to the server, and getting the results back, that can take a while. We can move some of the business logic of an application to the client, and that can improve the performance of the application. Finally, we can tap into an enormous collection of JavaScript packages. The Shiny ecosystem provides a lot of packages, but ultimately, the number of JavaScript developers are orders of magnitude more than R developers. because it's a general language. So there's just a huge variety of packages available, through JavaScript that we can tap into and add to our Shiny apps. And we'll do some of that today in the workshop. There are at least 4 different ways that we can augment our Shiny code with JavaScript. If it's something fairly small, adding a little bit of pizzazz to user interface, you can always add, CSS and JavaScript in line with your R code. I'm not going to cover that today. If you're writing a little more code, you can create, JavaScript CSS files, put them in your inst directory, for instance, if you have a kind of a package structure for your app. And then use, jQuery to load these and integrate these. The third option we're going to cover today is using a modular component framework. So if you want to build sort of larger pieces of JavaScript functionality, you should use a modular framework like HTML widgets or React are. A fourth option I'll mention here too is that you could, if you wanted to, create an entire user interface with JavaScript and then integrate that with the Plumber backend. Plumber is just an R package for developing APIs. So that's another option as well. We're going to base our workshop around option 3 today. So when I first started writing JavaScript code in RStudio, this is kind of what it looked like. But first of all, writing code is about iteration. We write a few lines of code, a little bit, and then we run it and make sure it does what we want to. We might run a unit test or open it up and look at the user interface. And so it behooves us to sort of make this iterative cycles as small as possible. But maybe it's just me, but when I do JavaScript development within RStudio, the cycle is pretty big actually. So I'll, starting at the top here, I'll make some code edits. And then I always want to have to restart my R session for it to recognize the JavaScript changes. Maybe it's just me, maybe there's something I could be doing better. But I usually have to do that to get the JavaScript to sort of be recognized. Then I have to restart my app. I may have to navigate through different parts of the UI to get to the feature that I'm testing. Then I'll sort of look at it, see if it looks right. If there's a problem, I might have to open up the app in a browser so I can use through the browser-based JavaScript, look at the JavaScript console, for instance. And this whole cycle here can take 5-10 minutes sometimes. Using the tools that I'm going to show you today, we can make this cycle a lot smaller. So we'll go from this larger cycle here to making JavaScript changes. We can immediately visualize these, immediately inspect the state of our JavaScript components. And so this whole cycle gets a lot smaller. We can be a lot more productive. So the tools we're going to talk about today are in the right column here. We're going to use the VS Code integrated development environment. So this is analogous to RStudio. VS Code is a Microsoft product. And it's probably the most widely used IDE for JavaScript, as well as other languages too. We're going to use the React framework as our main JavaScript user interface framework. There are other popular frameworks that I'll mention here. You might have heard of Angular. Angular is a Google product. There's another one called Vue. React it's an open source platform that Facebook developed and made available to everybody. It's probably the most popular client-side JavaScript framework there is at this point, although Angular and Vue are also really close as well. But it seems to be what's sort of integrated best within the sort of ecosystem of Shiny-based components. So I chose to use React here versus Vue or Angular or something else. I'm using Yarn as a JavaScript package manager. If you didn't get Yarn with your Node installation, you can also use NPM, which definitely comes with Node. There may be a few differences. I'll go through those. I'm going to be using a user interface development assistant called Storybook. And you'll see more of what this does for you as we go along in the workshop. But it really sort of cuts the iteration cycle as you're modifying user interfaces. You can kind of instantly see what you're building reflected in Storybook. We use Jeffs for unit testing. So this is very similar to the test that package in R. We're using Webpack to bundle all the JavaScript code together. We'll be writing modular JavaScript code. It's going to be in multiple files. We'll be integrating that with open source packages, and Webpack will sort of put it all together and make it available to our Shiny app. And we'll be pulling down packages from NPM, the sort of central node package management, package repository. It's kind of analogous to CRAN. I wanted to go through just a few JavaScript idioms, because idioms that I'll use in the workshop, because I find that not everybody's familiar with some of the more recent additions to the JavaScript language. So I'll be using const and let to declare variables rather than var. I find a lot of people still use var. You really shouldn't use var. The difference is when you use const or let, your variables are properly scoped. So they're scoped to the block you're working in. Whereas if you declare a variable using var, it's globally scoped. So you can have scope leak. So other parts of your app can probably inappropriately access these variables. I'll be using arrow functions. This is just a really concise way to represent a function in JavaScript. So this is what it looks like here. So you have a variable, the MBX here. These are arguments. These are parameters to the function, and this is the function body right here. This is roughly equivalent to on the right here. This is the kind of traditional functional declaration. There are, other than just the way it's represented, there are a few differences in how the parameters are scoped. I won't get into that now, but I just wanted you to sort of see the equivalence here. I'll also be using functional programming style, for instance, versus having loop constructs in the code. So I'll be using functions like map and reduce and for each, rather than explicitly iterating using a for loop, for instance. And if you use apply in your R code or the per package, you should be pretty familiar with how to do this. You essentially apply a function to like an array of data or a list of data kind of all at once versus iterating over that list array. If you have some experience with React, you'll probably know there's a couple different ways to define React components. We can, on the left here, we can create a React component. And this actually is a very simple React component on the left here. We can define that component as a function, or we can subclass a React component on the right-hand side. This is the older method. I'm not saying the left-hand side is better than the right-hand side. I'll be using the left-hand side in the workshop. It's a little more concise. There's nothing wrong with the right-hand side. I use the right-hand side quite a bit. I think it's a really good option if you have more complex components. If you have a lot of state, a lot of helper functions, I think it's a little more clear and easy to maintain if you use the construct on the right. But I just wanted to sort of put that out there, since I'll be using the one on the left during the workshop. We'll be going through two examples today. The first one, we're going to use React R and create a custom input using JavaScript. I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail about this in the first example, so you really get the feel of what it feels like to develop using this all of these tools. Then we're going to do a second exercise. This is going to be a lot quicker, but we're going to build we're also going to use React R and HTML widgets to create a custom output as well. So if you do the exercises either now or later on, there are a couple different options for you to do. I've created in the code that you've pulled down, I've created branches. So we'll be going through different steps. I have the exercises organized into steps. And for every step, there's a corresponding source code branch that you can use to skip ahead. But I also, in the workshop materials, and exercise materials, I also provide code snippets you can use to paste if you'd like. So either one of these are fine, you can mix them. But I'll show you how to do this more as we get along the exercises. Okay, so the general workflow we're going to use in this exercise, and I think a good general workflow for developing sort of R and JavaScript in general is as follows. So we'll talk about the requirements for each component first. We'll do some mock-ups and a little bit of design work. And then I usually like to create an R component stub first. Stub code, there are a couple reasons for this, but one of the main reasons for me is it allows me to when you create a stub, you can get a better sense of, okay, back up a little bit. Okay, so when you're working in the Java, I'm sorry, in the R world, your data structures are, typically, data frames and lists. And when that data gets sent over to JavaScript is going to get manipulated a little bit. And creating the R component stuff first, it allows me to create sort of test data sets. I can run the R component, pull the data down. I'm not going to know how to do that today, but I think you should be able to figure that out and get a better sense of what the data is going to look like when it gets to JavaScript. So then after I do the R component stub, I move over to my JavaScript toolchain. And then I work entirely in that JavaScript toolchain until I get my components done. At the very end, then I sort of loop back over and hook the R and the JavaScript code together. And then I'm finished. Okay, so that's what we're going to do today in the exercises. Okay, so let's move on to exercise 1. For the first exercise, we're going to create an input. I call this a super select. And this is the problem we're trying to solve. So when there's a large number of options, let's say you want to create a like a select input. And when you have a large number of options, this can lead to a lot of scrolling. You have these really long, lists of options, and users can complain about this. Users complain to me about this. So we want to create a super select that gives a little better user experience when you have a lot of different options to select. So this is the user story. As a user, I'd like to be able to select, one or more. The data we're going to use is lab parameters. So if you work in pharma, you've probably worked with lab data before. Lab parameters are just lab tests. And we tend to get these big data sets with 50, 60, up to 80 parameters from, say, clinical trials. So we want to be able to select one or more lab parameters from a large list. And we want all these to be on the screen at the same time, so we're not scrolling. Furthermore, we want them to be grouped into panels. So we want to group together tests that are related. There might be liver tests or kidney tests. We want these to be kind of grouped together. We want the panels to be arranged in columns, have a nice orderly arrangement on the screen. We want to be able to select or deselect individual parameters or entire panels of parameters. And we want to be able to hide or unhide the selector by clicking a button. Okay, so this is the user story. Let's take a look at what the mockups would look like. So this is a kind of a very rough look mockup here. So on the right-hand side here, we've got a number of panels. Each panel has tests, or these are just lab parameters. It's kind of like they're indented here. And we have our groups of tests organized into panels that are in these nice, neat columns here. And then this box here would be like maybe like a modal pop-up we can close. On the right-hand side, this kind of gets to the behavior. So when we click, so each panel is going to have a checkbox next to the name of that panel. And when we check the checkbox, we want all of the checkboxes to be checked here within the panel. And likewise, if we check the individual checkboxes, when we check all of them, we want the main select all checkbox to automatically check itself as well. So this is kind of a rough mock-up of the layout and kind of how the behavior should work for the component. So we're going to take this design and we're going to create 3 separate React components. The first component is going to be responsible for laying out an individual panel. So it's going to produce a panel heading with a select all checkbox, and then a checkbox for each of the individual lab parameters in this case. Okay, so it's just responsible for a single panel. The second component is going to be responsible for laying out a group of panels in these nice orderly columns. So it sort of renders the whole groups together. The third component is going to be our main component, what we call super select. And that's going to be responsible for creating the modal dialog here, and then sort of just laying everything else in it. So it'll provide the button, the modal dialog. And so we'll be able to do all this with 3 components. This is just another view of the code. This is kind of like more of an object diagram here. So we have our super select here. This is our main component. We have our checkbox groups here. And then this will be managing a number of individual checkbox group instances, each one of these mapping to a specific panel. with lab parameter tests. Okay, let me go ahead and chat this. We're going to go ahead, oops, sorry about that. I'm going to copy this and chat this link to everybody so you can open up the workshop instructions. So this is a link into the GitHub site, and this will be a really easy way to sort of follow along. It's a markup document. All the it's marked up, so you'll be able to see it formatted correctly, and be able to easily copy code out of this if you're going to follow along today. Before we do that, perhaps I should pause here and see if there's any questions so far.
David, I just mentioned real quick, I put the link to the RTT stuff out there just in case people want to play with it in a contained environment. They can also do it locally. I just want to let you know I put that in the chat box. If anybody has any questions on that, direct those to me directly and I can help you with that environment.
Great, thanks a lot, Phil.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to have two windows open. I'm going to have a browser on the right side, and then whatever IDE I'm using on the left side here. And hopefully this is large enough. Is this text large enough to see clearly? I can make it a little bigger if needed.
Yeah, I'd go a little bigger if that's okay.
Yeah, let me do that for you.
Yeah.
Oops. Sorry. May take me a second here. Okay. Is that any better?
Yep, looks great on my end.
Okay. How about the browser on the right-hand side? Is that okay? Want to be a little bit bigger?
Yeah, it's about the same as the left-hand side. Yeah, if you can go bigger without interrupting your workflow, that's always the problem I find is you go big and then it's like you're having to navigate something new, you know?
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, that looks good. Okay.
All right. So the first step of the exercise is we're going to go ahead and initialize our code base. So I'm going to just I'm going to go back to the terminal window that I opened up initially, and it looks like all the JavaScript packages have been installed. I'm just going to cd up. So I've changed to the top level directory of the code. So I'm going to go to the right hand side here. You can see that when you hover over these code blocks, you can click on this little button here, and that'll copy the code. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste that code, into the terminal, and that's going to open up or set this to the first step. It's going to check out the step one branch. Okay. I'm then going to go over to RStudio, and I'm going to create a new project. So new project. I hope I just selected new project. It's going to take a second to open up. And while that's waiting to open up, I'm going to have a sip of coffee. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I'm going to create this project in the existing directory. And I'm just going to browse to okay. All right, so I'm just going to put this on the top level of the repo code that we pulled down. And yep, that looks right. And I'm going to create the project. It's going to take a minute or so there to sort of go through its machinations. And while that's happening, I'm just going to maybe talk through the next step. We're then going to use the Golem package to create a Golem app. And if you've never used Golem before, Golem is a package for creating Shiny apps that have the structure of an R package. It's a really great way to structure your Shiny apps. There's some advantages to using a package-based structure. I think one is that it's really easy to sort of put unit tests in your code. And it's just a good way to keep all your code organized. Okay. So let me go back over here. I'm going to, we're down on step 4 now. I'm sorry, item 4, step 1. I'm going to copy this Golem code, and I'm going to go over to the R console in RStudio, not the terminal, but the console. Let me paste this in. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and create a bare bones Golem app. It's going to take a little time here. It's going to have to, I guess, restart the session or something, but it'll take a few more seconds here, hopefully not too long. So once our studio restarts, then we're going to have a very sort of bare bones Golem web app. It actually is a live web app, and we can go ahead and just start the app up, make sure everything works correctly, and then we'll go to work on adding some new functionality to the app. So remind me later. Okay. So you can see here in the file browser on the right side, there's some new files and folders. I'm gonna go into the dev folder. So Golem creates a dev folder. This is these are scripts that are used for development. I'm going to open up the run dev script here, and this is how you start the app. It's an app as a package. This basically kind of installs the package and starts the app up together. So I'm gonna run this entire script. I'm just going to do a Control A to select all of the code, and then a Control Enter, and that will start the application. There's not much here. It's not terribly exciting. But it just ensures that Golem, everything was set up correctly. Here's the shiny window. So it looks like the app is working correctly. Okay. Okay, so that's our first step. Now we're going to start actually writing the code. I would recommend, so you can see here the instructions on the right side. I sort of have this as optional, checking out the next step from GitHub. I think this should be mandatory. This just makes sure that if you didn't complete something or did a previous step, you didn't do it right. This just makes sure that you're starting with a clean set of code. But you don't have to check out this new branch. Now, in order to check this branch out, we're going to need to go. I'm just going to go into the RStudio terminal. So I'm going to click on the terminal window here, and take me a second for that terminal to open up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just right-click and paste, and this will check out the step 2 branch step of the workshop. Okay. Okay. The next step then is we're going to use the React-R package to create a scaffold input. This is going to create a few new files. It's going to basically create a stub for us for adding our own functionality. So I'm going to go to the right side. I'm going to copy the code. I'm going to go back to RStudio on the left. I'm going to click over to the console tab, and I'm going to paste this code in. Okay. All right. React-R has created several files for us. It opened one of these up. It opened the one that's called superselect.r, and this is analogous to the actual input code that you use in your Shiny UI. So this is analogous to like a text input or a select input. This is a super select input. So this is the main function you use to access the modules that we're building. It's also created a couple other files. Let me go and just show one of those. It's also created a new folder called source.js. This is one of the JavaScript source folders. And it's created this file called superselect.jsx. JSX is a file extension for React components. JSX is just it's kind of a HTML-like templating language used in React. But this file here that's generated by create.r, you can kind of think of this as like a glue. We're going to be writing a lot of additional JavaScript code, and this is kind of glue code that's going to connect our own custom JavaScript back with our code. We'll come back to this later with the last step. This is how we're going to integrate our JavaScript code with the R. But I'm not really going to say more about it at this point. Okay, so let's go ahead and just add this stub into our Shiny user interface. So I'm going to go back over to the File Explorer on the right side. I'm going to go into the R folder. I'm going to open up the app UI script. And this is a script that's generated by Golang. This has all the, it's analogous to the UI.R if you're using just plain vanilla Shiny. I'm going to go ahead and replace this function here, this app UI function, with the code here. Let me just copy and paste. So you can see what I've done here is that there's another line 16 here. This basically calls the super select input stub that was created by create R. And I've added another output here that will just mirror the input. Now the stub just has some, it's basically a text box. We'll replace that with code later on. But I just wanted to go ahead and put that into the user interface. We're also going to add a little bit of code to the server. So let's go into the app server. And going back over to the right-hand side, I'm going to click this code box here. I'm on step 3 now. I'm going to copy the code over here from this third step. I'm going to paste over the existing code. And so this basically just sends the selection, or what you put in the input box into the output box. Sorry, I don't think I really described that well, but you'll see how it works in a second. Okay, so we've created a stub for our super select. We've added that stub into both the Shiny UI and the server. Now let's run our Shiny app and we'll see what that stub looks like. Okay, I haven't seen that before, but that's weird. Let me okay, I'm gonna just try this again. Keep my fingers crossed it was a random error. Okay. I'm not really sure what that error is. I'm hoping it's going to go away later on. But I've tested this a lot, and that's never happened. Oh, I know the problem is, guys. I know the problem is. Okay, I need to. Sorry about that. The JavaScript source code needs to be built. We need to run yarn. Okay. Let me describe that a little bit more. The JavaScript source code is in this source folder here. But we have to package that first. And when we run Webpack, it packages that code and it copies that into the inst folder. So let me just do that right now. Sorry about that. I'm going to copy this step 4 here. I'm going to go here to the console on the left-hand side. Oh, sorry. I need to put this not in the console, but in the terminal. Apologize for that. So, so Yarn will package the JavaScript code up and put it in place that the application can access it. Okay, it'll take about maybe a minute or so to run, and after that, our app should run correctly. So. What Webpack is going to do for us, though, is that it's going to enable us to write modular code. So we can put different modules in different source files. Webpack, it will also package other packages together. If we pull down JavaScript packages that we'd like to use in our app, it'll sort of package that together with it'll sort of put it all in one place and minimize it as well. So it's a really common tool in web development. Okay, now let's go back over to and run our Shiny app. It should run correctly now. So nothing too exciting yet. So the stub that React R created for us just creates a text box. I can put in code, and we'd written an output to basically mirror what's in the input. Okay, so not terribly exciting yet, but that's the stub. Okay, so we created our R stub. Now we're going to go over to the JavaScript side, and so moving on over here to the right side, step 3. I'm actually going to skip over this, but I want to talk through what's happening. I'm skipping over it because it can take a long time to run. It can take maybe 15 minutes or so. I don't want to have 15 minutes of dead time during the workshop, obviously. But anyway, let me just sort of quickly describe what's going to happen here. The first step in creating React code is we need to initialize our code base. And if you've ever done React development, most of the time you use a script. It's available through NPM. The script is called create React app, and that will basically create a skeleton React application for you. We're not going to use create React app because we're not creating a React application. We're creating React components. So rather than doing that, we're going to use this command here. We're not, but when you do that, you can use this command here. But this basically, there's a package called Neutrino, and this creates a structure for your R components. We're also going to add Storybook to our code base, and this command here does that. So we'll get into Storybook in a second. But again, this may take a while, so we're not going to do this during the workshop. But if we skip over and check out step 4 from the Git repo, then we'll be able to sort of skip ahead and everything will be set up for us. So I'm going to move over and open up VS Code for the JavaScript work. Okay, and I'm actually going to open a terminal. So I'm going to go over to the terminal menu here, go to new terminal, and this will open up a terminal for me in the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and check out step 4. So let me paste this into the terminal and run it. Get our code up to date. Oops, I need a CD in the right. Oh, yeah, sorry, I have to open up the right folder. I'm going to go to open folder. And let me do the path. So our React source code is going to be in this folder here called Source React. I'm going to go ahead and open this up in VS Code. It'll just be a little more efficient working this way. Okay. Now, I guess I need to open the terminal again. Let me just give VS Code a second. Open up a new terminal. Okay. And let me go ahead and check out the branch that we'll be using. Okay, so this will initialize our React code for us. It will set up Storybook for us. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to run Storybook. So I'm actually going to go over to the terminal, the original terminal window, and run Storybook from there. So I can still use my terminal within VS Code. So I'm going to CD into the source React folder where all the React code is. And I'm going to type yarn Storybook. Okay. So Storybook is actually a local web application. And what it will do is that it'll allow you to develop components in isolation. And it will present these components to you on a web page where you can interact with them. You can test their behavior. You can make sure that your components are laid out, the UIs are laid out correctly. It allows you to use these components without having to put them in a full app. And the benefits there are that you don't have to. Let's say you're just working within a whole app. You'll have to maybe restart your app, and you'll have to navigate to the right place, and it's a pain. It's so much more efficient to write, to be able to create your components in isolation. And that might make sense right now, but hopefully it will be as we go through the exercise more. while it takes usually a minute or two for Storybook to start up, while that's happening, I don't want to waste time. I'm going to go back over and we're going to go ahead and start creating some code in Visual in VS Code. So I'm going to go back over to my VS Code window, and we're going to create. Go to the files here. So you can see the tree of files and folders here on the left side. You can see a folder here called source. This is where our source code lives. There's already a few things in here that were set up, created by Storybook, and when we created the React components, they were automatically populated with some code. There's an example component here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a top level folder for the new components we create. So I'm going to hover over this components folder here. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to say new folder. And I'm going to just, I'm going to follow the sort of React conventions. I'm going to use Pascal casing for the folder name. Okay. So this is going to where we're going to put all of our components for the super select that we're building. And the first thing we're going to do back over here is that we're going to create this component here, our sort of basic checkbox component that renders a single panel of lab params. Okay, so let's go back over. Let's see if Storybook has started yet. It might still be starting up. Yeah, it needs a little more time. Okay, but while that's happening, I'm going to go ahead and create our first JavaScript file. So let me scroll down, make sure that my right and left are synchronized. Okay, so I'm going to right click on this folder here, super select folder, and I'm going to choose new file, and we're going to call this new file checkboxgroup.jsx. So this will contain all of our code for our first component. And we're just going to initialize this with some hello world code just to get started. So I'm going to copy this code block here, item 6, and just paste that into the file. Okay. So this is our React component. It doesn't really do very much. It just basically sort of outputs a hello world as a level 1 heading. And so when you write React uses a templating language called JSX. It's basically a superset of HTML. But this is, so it should look familiar to you if you've written HTML before. Let's see. It's like Storybook is still starting up. Oh, looks like it's almost there. Okay. Okay, normally Storybook will open up a new window. Okay, there it goes. It's automatically opening. So here you can see opening up. This is Storybook. Again, it's a local web application. It's a web app that's running on your machine, and it comes preloaded with a few example components. So for instance, here there's one called button. These are just examples, but these are individual components that are combined to make a larger user interface. And we're going to create. We've created our checkbox group, so we're going to add this into Storybook. To do that, we need to create a Storybook configuration file. So for every component, we're going to have a separate JavaScript file, and then a separate configuration file to allow us to view our component in Storybook. So coming back over to VS Code, I'm going to right-click on the super select folder here. I'm going to say new file, and I'm going to name the file the same as the component checkbox group, but the suffix will be different. So I'm going to say stories.jsx. And Storybook will recognize this. We need to add a little bit of configuration, though, to Storybook so it can work for us. So I'm going to just copy this code block from step 8 into the Storybook configuration file. I'll kind of quickly go through this. You can read more about this, at your leisure after the workshop. But you can see here, I'm first of all importing the component. This is the component that we're working on, we're creating right now. This configuration here, this is just something that is used by Storybook to display. This is a template. This basically just creates the component. And you can have multiple tests for each component. We're going to start with just one test here, and you can each of your tests you can provide different arguments to. It's a way to make sure that your component works correctly, with different arguments. We're initially just going to not pass any arguments. This is an empty. We'll add some later on. So once we save both of these, it should show up in Storybook. So if you look here on the left side, let me make this a little bit bigger. So you can see on the left side here, you can see this new node checkbox group. And there it is, it's displaying our component. So not terribly exciting, but we didn't really have to do very much other than just put in this configuration. So let's start putting in some real code. I'm gonna go back to the exercise and we're gonna actually check out the code for the next step. So let me just copy this get command. I'm going to go back over to VS Code. I'm going to paste this in. Okay, so this is going to make sure that our code is we're starting from clean code. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to add a bunch of new code to our component. And that's all here in this code block here, item 1. I'm going to go ahead and just copy this. And I'm going to replace all the code here in checkbox group. Let me just quickly go through this. So one thing to notice here is that I've put styling information into the actual component, into the JavaScript file. React components can get CSS styles from several different places. One, they can read it in from like a global CSS file. I don't recommend that. I think it's better to have component-specific CSS. The second option is to put your styles into the JavaScript file. I normally do that unless I have a lot of styles. And if I do have a lot of styles, the third option is to create a specific CSS file for each component file. I won't cover how to do that today, but that is a third option if you have a lot of styles. So these are just objects that have styling information. Let me just highlight this really quickly so you can see how it's actually used. So this is how we actually use the style. This is how we refer to the style. So I have a div here that applies this style. So the main component code, though, is in this function here, checkbox group. This is creates a React component. Again, we have JSX, or templating. There are two arguments that we're passing this component. And I'll show you in a second, how you actually call this component. But it takes two arguments, the group label and the actual items. So going back over to our mockup, the group label, I wanted to keep things generic on the JavaScript side. So that basically is the name of the panel. So that's sort of the group label in the JavaScript will create a sort of a select all checkbox. So you click this checkbox and all the checkboxes in the individual items will be checked. And it puts this heading in here. And then the individual items are right here. So these come in through these arguments, group label and items. Okay. So we've got some code here that renders the select all checkbox and puts the group label there. And then we've got this code block here. So when you write JSX, it's a mixture of HTML and JavaScript basically. So all the tags here obviously are HTML. And we have this function, this map function. So this is kind of like the apply function in R. It takes an input data structure, in this case, an array, and for every item in the input structure, it creates an output. And this is just what the output looks like. Again, it's very analogous to using apply or lapply or dapply in R. Okay, so it's creating a checkbox and a label. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And we need to update our Storybook configuration. we need to tell Storybook to pass in values for these two arguments. So let's go back over here. I'm going to copy from this block here. This is item number 2. And let's paste that in. Okay. And when we go back to Storybook, you can see that Hello World has changed. Now we actually have a real set of checkboxes. Now, this latest iteration of code, all it does is lay out these checkboxes and labels. It doesn't actually add any behavior to them. So our next step would be to add behavior. We want, when we check the top checkbox here, we want these two sub boxes to be checked. And when we check the sub boxes, we want the main box up here to also be checked. Okay, so we need to add a little behavior. So that's what we're going to do next. So I'm going to go back over to the exercise. And for step 4 here, we're going to just copy over the code that adds that behavior. So I'm just going to click all the code here. Going to get back over to our checkbox group file. I'm going to do a Control All to select everything. Control V, we're going to just completely replace the code. Let me just quickly go through a few things that changed. You know, if you've never used React, again, you're not going to come out of this workshop at expert React. Now, I'm not going to go through everything here, but I want to give you a sense of what's happening. First of all, I've added a couple of additional arguments to the component. One, selected items. This allows us to sort of pre-select some of these select boxes. We'll need that in a real application. I've also passed in this callback function on change. And this would be a way for, you know, if the user changes their settings, to sort of pass that back up to other components. One of the other things I've added into this version of the component is state. Okay, so state, hopefully people intuitively know what state means. It just means the state, you know, what at a given point in time, sort of what's happening. We use state, you might not use it explicitly when you're creating, you know, any given Shiny app, but it's there. React uses a mechanism that's fairly analogous to reactive programming in Shiny. In reactive programming in Shiny, you have outputs that depend on inputs. And when you change those inputs, you know, using reactivity, your outputs will sort of automatically detect when the inputs have changed. Now, there's a level of indirection in the React JavaScript framework. It has something like that, but you have to create a state that lives separately from user interface. So, for instance, this statement here on line 53 creates a state variable called allSelected. It also creates a setter that we can use to change the value. But the user interface code will sort of monitor the value that's all selected. And when it changes, kind of like in Shiny, it will sort of re-render the user interface based on that. But rather than doing it automatically like Shiny, you have to actually have, to write code that calls this. But let me just quickly, I'm going to highlight this all selected. I'm going to skip down to the user interface here. And this is how it works. So all selected, when this is true, it means that the checkbox, that top level checkbox, should be checked. And this is the code that creates that checkbox. And the check property, this is just a HTML property. We using these curly brackets here, we set this equal to the all selected state variable. And when this variable changes, React automatically re-renders user interface. So again, it's very much analogous to reactivity in a Shiny application. Okay, but we have to write code to explicitly change the state. And I've done that here. So I have an event handler on this input. I pass in a function called handles change select all. So that function is right here. And so that will do a few things. It'll change the state. It'll also change the state of this state variable here. This includes the state. It contains the state of all the individual checkboxes below the top level. Okay, so it sets all this as well. Okay, all right. So let me go ahead and again, we need to update our Storybook configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and on line, item 5 here, copy this code. I'm going to paste it. I'm just going to do a Control-All, a Control-V to replace the contents of checkbox group stories at JSM. Let me get back over to Storybook. And you can see a few things. I've created 3 different test cases here. One has no initial selections. One has 1 initial selection here, and the third one has 2 initial selections. So they should all have different behaviors. So let me click on the no initial selection. So what you'll notice here is that it has behavior. So when I click the top checkbox, the sub boxes here click, and so you can see they're all kind of wired together now. Okay. Now the initial selections, again, we want the caller to be able to set the initial set of selections here. And so I've clicked here the with initial selections test case, and that works properly. And all selected, if all are selected, we should have the top level checkbox should also be selected. Okay, so that's working correctly. Okay. All right. So we've essentially implemented the functionality for this one component. We've written some code for testing the UI. Now, the next step is to actually create a unit test. If you're working in the pharma industry, if you're working in GXP applications, we have to prove that our code works correctly. And a great way to do that is by writing unit tests. When we write unit tests, if you ever use the test that package in R, that's analogous. Unit testing is something it's really good to do is writing code. It can help us find bugs early. Again, if we're working on GXP applications, we can also generate evidence. We can create reports for our unit test and use that to support the validation of our systems for GXP. So we'll go ahead and create a unit test or some unit tests, and then we'll be done with this component. So let me go to the next step. Okay, we're going to go here. I'm going to go to this box here, check out step 6. I'm going to go back over to React. Check out 6. It shouldn't do anything, but I just want to make sure my code is starting clean. Okay. All right, so we need to create a directory structure for unit testing. So I'm going to go to the left-hand side here, back to the source code tree. You can see there's a node here called test, a folder called test. I'm going to right-click on this. I want to have a similar folder structure to the actual source code. So I'm going to say new folder. I'm going to create a components folder. And then I'm going to right-click on components. I'm going to create a folder called super select. And so this is a parallel structure to the source code up here. It's just a good way to organize your code. Okay. Sorry, let me find. Okay. Okay. Next, we're going to create a unit test file. So I'm going to hover over the super select folder here on the right side. I'm going to right click that and we'll say new file. And I'm going to call this checkbox group underscore test.js. This way, our testing framework will find it automatically. Okay. So we're just going to copy and paste all of the unit test code over. So I'm going to go down to this code block here, item 2. I'm going to paste in our unit test code. Okay. And going to copy that. So we're using the Jest package, JavaScript package for unit testing, and it's very similar to test that in R. If you've used test that before, this should look really familiar to you. We have tests here, and we have expect statements that we can run various parts of the code here, and then verify using this expect statements that we're getting the results that we're expecting. Now, let me just back up and say, when you're testing React components, there's basically 2 different ways to do it. The first way, which you're doing here, is called DOM testing. So DOM is an acronym. It stands for Document Object Model. And what a DOM is the underlying data structure behind a web page. Okay. So our JavaScript code, it manipulates the DOM. It makes changes to the DOM, and that actually leads to changes, visual pages, or changes in your web page. Another way of testing is doing kind of more like playback tests. So you can actually record a task the way it should look. And when you rerun your test, there'll be a comparison. It'll just the testing framework will check and see if the your most recent run matches the output of the previous run. I won't do that. It's a little more tricky to set up, a little more brittle. We're going to do DOM testing here. I'm not going to go through this in any detail really, other than I've got some setup code here that basically renders our checkbox group. So this actually creates a DOM in memory. You don't actually see the DOM, but it creates a DOM with this component here, and allows us, we can actually do things to this component. We can fire events. We can check to make sure that it's rendered correctly. So for instance, here, line 43 and 45, I've got some expect statements. So we expect that there's going to be a component labeled with the group label, and it's in the document, and it's not checked initially. Okay. Our second test here, we have one item selected, pre-selected. We just make sure that rendered correctly. I think getting down to test 5, this is a little more interesting. So we actually have code here that fires an event. So this will actually click the checkbox, and it'll make sure that your checkbox is correct. Okay, anyway, again, I'm not going to go through this in detail. You can learn more about these sort of tests on your own. It's easy to find information. Let me go ahead and run the test. And let me skip down. So this would be, sorry, item 3 here. I'm going to just copy this command. It says yarn test. I'll go over to the terminal and type yarn test. Now, it takes a little while so Jest, again, is the testing framework here. It takes a little bit longer for Jest to start up versus test that. I don't know why. It might take a minute or two for this to run. But essentially, once we've done this, we finished the JavaScript part of this component. We're going to really quickly create the next 2 components. So we're back over to our presentation here. We're going to create a checkbox groups. Again, its job is to lay out the individual checkbox in columns like this. And then we'll create our super select, which lays out all this in a modal dialog. And we'll go through that pretty quickly. So while this is running, let me just pause and see if there's any questions or comments at this point. Also, we'll be done in maybe another 5 or 10 minutes with this exercise. We probably should maybe take a quick bio break. Do we normally take breaks during? I guess hopefully we do that during these.
Yeah, usually about every, between 45 minutes and an hour, but it's totally up to the instructor, but 3 to 6 minutes is usually pretty normal. Okay.
All right. Maybe this would actually be a good time to take a break. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, totally sounds good. I can, if you like, I can play some music so people can hear it behind the scenes, and then, come on back when the music's over. Yeah, so we're going to take, so it's my clock says 18 after the hour. You want to meet back about what time? Maybe 25? Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, great.
All right, sounds good. All right, David, all you.
Excellent, okay.
Yep, see it perfect.
Great. All right, well, welcome everybody back. And while you were on your break, unit tests finished. As you can see on the bottom left here, all tests passed, so that's good. And so we have one component that, at least for the JavaScript part, is wrapped up. We built it, tested it, unit tested it, so we're good there. So we're really going to quickly go through building the other 2 components, and then we'll have a full input that we can then link back into our Shiny app. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to go check out the next branch. This is step 7. Okay, and we're going to create some new source code files then. So back over to VS Code on the left side here, under our super select, I'm going to right click this, and we're going to create a new component, a new file called checkbox groups with an S at the end. Okay, and its job again is to render one or more checkbox group instances into nice, neat columns. So I've got the code here to do that here. So this is step 3 on the right side. I'm going to copy that code, paste it in. Okay. And it's a pretty short piece of code here, not really a lot. We've got some styling at the top here. We have a few arguments that get passed in. The elements maybe could have been more consistent with my naming of variables. The elements are the items that well, I guess it is consistent. So each one of these elements, I'll show you what the data looks like in a second, but it's basically maps to a panel. So there's an overall name, a group name for the panel, and then a bunch of individual items for the checkboxes. Okay, this is the selected items, and then again we have a callback function here. Okay, so we have a loop here, not a loop, but we have a map function, and so this takes a set of elements, and for each element it creates essentially down here highlighted text here from line 43 on. Basically calls the first component that we created, checkbox group, and it just initializes it correctly. Okay, so we have one component calling another component. We have nested components, and that's kind of the beauty of React. You can create these really modular applications and sort of just nest things together and compose more complex user interfaces from smaller building blocks. Okay, so we want to look at this in Storybook next. So I'm going to create a Storybook configuration file. Again, we want to have sort of one-in-one. Each of our modules should have a Storybook config file. So we're going to call this checkbox groups. Oops. .stories.jsx. So again, Storybook will recognize this file extension and automatically populate itself. So let's go ahead and copy the Storybook configuration. Just copy that and paste that in. Okay, let's go back to Storybook, and hopefully it didn't crash. Yep, you can see here on the left side, it's recognized our new component, and make this a little bit bigger for you. I've given it some test data, and you can see that it does what we want it to do. It's created these sort of columns of panels of checkboxes. Each one of these is a individual checkbox group. We can select individual lab params or all lab params. So everything is rendering and is wired up correctly here. Okay. Not going to go through the details really. Let's move back over and create our. Okay. Just want to get a check, Phil. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yeah, it sounds perfect. I can see it. It's a tad bit small, but I mean, it looks great. I can see it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. I clicked something I shouldn't have clicked, basically.
Oh,
okay.
Everything's good. Yep.
Okay, so we're going to now create our main component, the super select. And super select, again, it creates this modal dialog box, and it's a container for the checkbox groups. So let's go over and create a file for it. So I'm going to right click, create new file, call it super select.jsx. And we'll paste the code in for that. That is over here. Okay. And I'll just sort of maybe quickly go through this. I guess one thing to point out is that this component is using a third-party package called React Modal. So this is available through the npm repository, the main repository. It's got a little extra state here, so maybe I'll point out some of the state. I guess one state variable is if it's visible. So if it isn't visible, you'll see this. It'll just render a button, an open button. When you click the button, the state will change to true, and it'll show you the pop-up modal. Okay, I'll show it in a second. But otherwise, it's fairly short piece of code here. We need to create a storybook configuration file for it. So call it super select.stories.jsx. And let's see, where's that code? Back to the right side. Let's copy this code here from item 10, paste it. Now let's go back over to Storybook. And yep, you can see here, there's a new element here, super select. And let's click that. So you can see, make this a little bigger here by default. It's showing us a button. Click the button and it pops up this modal dialog box. So now we can select stuff. Okay. And there's a close button here. Okay. Again, there's a lot to go through. If you're new to React, you'll have a learning curve, but hopefully my code would help you. If you do want to start developing JavaScript components like this. But I don't really have time to go through all the details here in this workshop. Okay, so at this point, we've finished up on the JavaScript side. We've created all three of these components, and the next step is for us to move back over to the R world and connect up this code with the R code, and that's just a couple more steps. So back over to the exercise, I'm going to go back over to RStudio. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and check out the next branch from GitLab. I'm going to the terminal. And make sure our code is up to date. Okay. Okay. So before we move to JavaScript, remember we had set up a stub, some code stub in RStudio. So we're going to go and we're going to replace that stub code with code that will connect into our JavaScript that we just developed. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is I'm going to go over to the super select JSX. Okay, this is the sort of glue code that the React R package had created for us. Okay, and this code again, it's just kind of like sort of placeholder code. It creates an input. We're going to replace that code. So I'm going to go over to this code block here. Control A, Control V. And a couple of things to note here. First of all, we're importing the super select component. You can see here, I had to put a path. It's kind of a long path, but this is an import statement. So this is basically what ties the code we've just written into the in with the R part of the app. Okay. So in addition to that, I've put in I've made a call. I've actually sort of have put in the element here to actually render the super select. Okay. Now, super select needs some configuration. It needs some items needs a list of items for rendering the checkboxes, and that comes from this configuration. I'll try to point out in the R code sort of how the data gets passed through, but through this JavaScript glue code, it comes in through this configuration argument here. Okay. All right. The next thing we have to change, we want to go replace our stub code in the R select, sorry, the super select.R script. This is another stub that React R created for us. I'm going to replace this function here, the main function here, super select input, with some code. There are a couple of things that are different about this. Okay, one is that I have another parameter here. This is called lab param tree. Again, I could have been more consistent with naming, but this is basically a list structure that contains the elements for the super select. So the individual checkboxes kind of grouped together in these larger lab panels. Okay, so that gets passed in. We pass that to JavaScript through this argument here, elements equals lab param tree. Again, that maps to configuration.elements through there. And let's see, lastly, we need to modify the UI functions. Let's go to the app_UI, and I'm going to replace the current UI function like this. All I'm doing differently here is just passing in these this list for the super select. Okay. Okay. So we've made all the R changes we need to make. Our last step is to run Webpack. So Webpack here down on the right side, step 6. Webpack, again, it'll combine all the JavaScript code together and minimize it, make it more efficient. I'm sorry, well, make it smaller so it loads more efficiently. But it combines all that together again. We go to the terminal, paste this in. It'll take Webpack a minute or two to actually run. But while that's happening, let me just sort of take you on a tour really quickly, show you what happens. So what's happening is that Webpack is taking code in this source React. This is the source, our React source code, okay? It's combining that with code. Our glue code is in the source JavaScript folder. It's packaging that all together and copying that to inst. It's going to create a new folder called, I guess it's not quite there yet. It'll be called HTML widgets. Let me just wait for Webpack to, I'll try a bit more. But anyway, it'll basically create, one JavaScript file that has all of our code sort of bundled together and minimized. And after that finishes, we can run the app, and it should begin there. So it normally takes about a minute for this to run. 47 seconds this time, okay? All right, so now I'm gonna go back to the run dev R script, and I'm gonna start the Shiny app. So we're gonna run the Shiny app, and if all goes well, the JavaScript component that we just created is gonna be integrated with the Shiny app, okay? So this is a Shiny app. This looks good so far. Let's click this button here, selected items. And there we go, it pops up a checkbox. We can check individual items or entire panels. Click the close button. And we had some code that just basically printed out what you'd selected. And there we go. Okay. So that basically concludes the first exercise. We've created just a sort of recap. Again, we created a stub, R stub. We moved over to JavaScript. We wrote all the JavaScript code, the 3 different components in JavaScript. We tested it, storybook and unit tested it. Move that back over to the R, connect everything together, and it works. Okay. We're going to really quickly move on to the next exercise then. And in that exercise, we're going to build an output. I'm going to go ahead and chat to you. I'm going to put this in the chat. I have a different markup document that has the instructions if you'd like to follow along. So that's in the chat right now. Let me just go back to the slides and give a little introduction for the second exercise. Okay. In the second exercise, we want to create an output that enables us to view multiple sets of lab data on the screen at the same time. And so we're going to take the output from the super select actually and create charts of lab data with this exercise. So this is our user story. We'd like to be able to view one or more selected labs data sets longitudinally. We'd like the charts to take up as much of the screen as possible. So we want them to be as big as possible, but not be so big that we have to scroll. So if we have more charts on the screen, we want them to be a little smaller. We just don't have to scroll. We want this to just be pretty easy user experience. We want the charts to be interactive with hypertext and also display the sort of the normal ranges, the normal high and low ranges for each of the lab tests. Okay, and if this doesn't make sense to you, it will once you see it, hopefully. So this is a couple mock-ups here. On the left-hand side here, this is kind of the sort of a mock-up where you just have one chart on the screen. It takes up a lot of space here. The lab data are shown as a sort of squiggly line. The two horizontal lines here, this represents sort of the low and the high normal range. The x-axis would be sort of a time dimension, maybe visits or study days, and the y-axis, whatever the lab parameter is. Now, when you've selected multiple parameters, it would look more like this. You'd have multiple smaller charts, but they're scaled so that they're all on the screen at the same time, so we don't have to do a lot of scrolling around. So we're going to create two React components. One is going to be responsible for rendering a single chart, and the second component is going to be responsible for rendering all the charts. It's going to size the charts appropriately so they all fit on the same screen, and sort of put them into these sort of nice orderly columns like this. I wanted to just talk a little bit about how our data frames are sent to JavaScript. So when we create our input, we didn't really send any, well, we did send some data input, but we're going to be sending a lot more data to the output. So when you have a data frame in R like this, so we've created this data frame called foobar. There's 4 different columns here. You get a structure like this. We sort of, think of this as a table. So the HTML widget framework will send this data to JavaScript. But your JavaScript data will look like this. It'll consist of an object of arrays. So every column in your data frame will be an array in this larger object. Okay. This is a little difficult to work with, so we're going to have actual code. Part of our code is going to transpose this. So we go from an object of arrays to an array of objects. So yeah, that may not be clear now, but hopefully it'll make more sense later on. Just wanted to mention that. Okay. I've already chatted the URL to the second exercise instructions, so let me go ahead and switch over then. Okay. We're going to start off in our studio. So let me go ahead and check out the initial step here. So let's check out step 9. Start out with some clean code here. Okay. Now, after we get our code set up, our next step, we're going to take this command. We're going to use React R again, and we're going to use this command, scaffold React widget. This is going to create an HTML widget. It's going to basically create a stub HTML widget for us. So I'm going to go back over here to the console, the R console. I'm going to paste this in. Our widget's going to be called ML chart. And before this happens, I'm going to just close some of these tabs up here because it's going to open some new files, and I want these new files to sort of stand out. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. So React R is going to create a scaffold for us, or a stub, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of doing its thing right now. Might take a few moments here. Okay. All right, so it's created a number of new files for us. The first file, this is going to contain this first file here, mlcharts.r. This contains our sort of our main R function code. So this is what you'll use in your Shiny user interface. These 3 functions. So you'll use this output, mlchart output, render mlchart, and this is where the functions, these 2 functions here, they're kind of like boilerplate. You don't actually have to change them, but we'll make some modifications after we sort of do the JavaScript part of this. We'll come back and modify this mlchart function here. Okay. It's also created a YAML file. We're not going to use this. This is kind of a I don't know, kind of a legacy, I think, when people would bundle separate libraries together. This is just a way for you to tell Shiny where to find different libraries. We're using Webpack to bundle our code together versus having multiple library files or package files. It's also created this kind of glue code, so this mlchart.jsx. So again, this is kind of the glue that glues together our JavaScript components with R. Okay. All right, so we've basically done our setup on the R side. Let's move back over to the JavaScript side. I'm going to go back to VS Code. And I'm going to go ahead and check out step 10. And this is going to create a bunch of, we're not going to be writing individual code files anymore. So this is going to create a bunch of code for us. And let's see. All right. So let me first of all just see this. Sometimes when you do like lots like this, if you check out new branches, this can sometimes kind of cause Storybook to crash. Let's see what happens. Let's see. It might crash. If it crashes, we'll just restart it. No big deal. I guess it's sort of thinking about things. While it's thinking, let me just go back over and we're going to take a look at what just happened. Okay, so this code branch contains all the source code for our output components. There's a new component folder here called multi-lab chart, okay? And we have two components here, lab chart. Again, lab chart is kind of the individual chart here, and then multi-lab chart, which puts all these together, puts multiple lab charts together, okay? So our lab chart here is this component. I'm not going to really go through this in too much detail, but I guess one thing to point out is that we're using an open source package called recharts, R-E-C-H-A-R-T-S, to actually create the individual charts. You can see down here below how they're rendered here, starting at line 22 or so. There's a stories configuration file with that. The multi-lab chart, this code is a little complicated. There's a lot of code that does math. It figures out, given the size of the current window and given how many charts you want to create, it actually does some math to figure out how big to make each individual chart. I won't go through that math, but if you can at you'd like at your leisure. Another thing to point out here is that I talked about having to transform data sometimes. So there's another package here called array object transformer. So it's using a function called object to array, which takes your object of arrays and converts that to an array of objects. And that just makes it a little easier to manipulate the data. Don't have time to go through all the code here, but you can, again, peruse this at your leisure. Let's go back over to Storybook then. And it didn't crash, fortunately. You can see there's stories now for lab chart. I have one case for lab chart. You can see there's some dummy data here. There's a data point here for each of the lab values. There's red lines here, horizontal lines for the normal range. Let's go down to multi-lab chart. Now for this, I've created a number of test cases or a number of different tests. So here's one for one chart. The chart's kind of, the chart math actually tries to keep the same aspect ratio. So the same ratio of width to height as the browser window. So that's why it kind of looks maybe a little funny here. It's a little taller than wider. Normally we see our charts more wide than tall, but I'll maximize the window. You can see it resizes. Not the sizing's not perfect. I had done a better job. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it. Okay, so there's another case where we render 5 charts. Again, we're trying to render all of them on the same screen, so they're a little bit smaller. Let's go to 20 charts. So it gets a little hard to read individual charts at this point. We go to all of them. There's like 50 charts in all of them. So this gets definitely very ugly. Make this a little bigger. But anyway, this is part, kind of illustrates the power of using Storybook. We can, create a bunch of different test cases here just to make sure that under different conditions our outputs are rendering correctly. Okay. Okay. So again, we're not going into a lot of detail. I just wanted to basically point out the differences between the input and the output we created. And we've essentially wrapped up the JavaScript part. So now we're going to go back over to R. So let me open up our studio again, and we're going to go finish that up. Okay. So let me check out this code branch here. It's actually the final code branch. I'm going to go to the terminal in RStudio. Paste that in there. Okay. And I will give you a quick tour on what happened here. Okay. So first off, let me actually go to the UI, the UI code. So let me go into App UI. Okay. So what I've done in the UI here is I've strung together the inputs. I've taken the super select input and I've added the output. And I want to show the server code, but basically I've got a reactive that takes the value from the input and sends that to it constructs a data set that goes to the output. Well, I guess I will show that. Why not? So the server code has a reactive here. It basically takes some test data, filters that based on what was selected with the input, then passes that data to the output. Okay. I've enhanced the ML chart function. So this is our main script here. So this is the data that gets passed in. Then this gets passed the React component. Again, you can on your own follow this. It's a little hard, I think, maybe to illustrate this, but so we go to the glue code here, ML chart JSX. And there's no explicit data pass off here. The data pass off kind of happens transparently. You don't have to worry about that as long as you set this right here. So this React-R component, this is how you pass your data in. And you can read about this at your leisure, but that's really all you need to do to pass data into JavaScript. JavaScript then will take that data. It'll come in as an object of arrays, convert that to an array of objects, and you're done. Okay, so we just need to run Webpack and to package our JavaScript code together. I'll run that in the terminal within RStudio. It'll take a minute or two to run. And again, we're going to be taking it will take code from source React down here and source.js. It'll combine that with the packages that we pulled down, and it will minimize everything together. While that's running, I guess just for the fun of it, I can show you what this package code looks like. Let's go down for the code for the input. So this is the package code. So this is the output from Webpack. This is what Webpack creates. I'll just open this up just for the fun of it. And you can see that it doesn't really look like anything like the source code. It does a lot of minimizing. It does a lot of sort of transformation of the input code. But the output code has the same logic. It minimizes the code, so it sort of scrunches it together. And it only takes the code for the packages that are needed. So it really is a minimized set of code. And that's always fun to look at. You can actually run Webpack to create code that's beautified, so it actually looks. If you need to do troubleshooting, there's an option in Webpack where you can create beautified code. So this will it actually won't change variable names. It'll be more human readable, or more, I guess, developer readable. Well, developers are humans too. Okay, so we've packaged our code now. Let's go back over to the run dev script and let's actually run our Shiny app. And if all goes well, we should have an input and an output, and they shall be wired together. And keep our fingers crossed. Okay, there we go. We see our multi-select here. Let's go ahead and select some. I'm just going to randomly select a few labs here to view. Maybe these. And I'll hit close. And voila, there we go. We have our outputs. So they're integrated into R. Everything works correctly. I'll add a few more just for fun. Let's really add a lot in here. Really torture the app. But every time we hit the close button, it updates. Okay, so that's really it for exercise 2. Let me just do a quick recap. So in this workshop, we've talked about how to set up a parallel set of tools, a parallel tool chain in JavaScript. Now, this is something you probably won't need to do if you're just writing little bits of JavaScript within your app. But once you get to the point where you're writing larger components, bigger pieces of JavaScript code, it really behooves you. It really be to your advantage to set up a parallel JavaScript tool chain. Some of the individual benefits here. So using VS Code, VS Code is, RStudio is a fantastic IDE, but VS Code really is fit for purpose for JavaScript development. React, using the React framework, this brings a number of benefits. One, it allows us to modularize our code. Rather than just having one big JavaScript file, we can modularize. We can have one file per component. We can combine individual components together to make larger components. It's really great for that. It has a really nice HTML templating language, JSX, and it also brings a huge range of packages, from the open source community that we can use to enhance our Shiny apps. And Yarn, Jest, Webpack, NPM, you got to use those. But Storybook, again, this really allows us to rapid iteration. You hopefully got a sense for that as we're going through making changes to the code. But in reality, when you're writing your code, you write a few lines, you want to see how that looks, write a few more lines. And with Storybook, the whole iteration process is really, really fast. You don't have to navigate to a particular part of your application. You have to restart your app. It's just a really sort of a smaller cycle. Again, you can develop and test individual components with Storybook as well. So that pretty much wrapped things up. We're ending about an hour earlier than scheduled. Just thanks to everybody. I really appreciate you sticking in here, and I hope this is beneficial to you. We'll send an email after the workshop with various links. Again, all the resources that we covered in this workshop are in this GitHub repo here. You can take these and use them as you like, and use these in your own projects. You can do the exercises later on, whatever you want to do. I'd be happy if you reached out to me. The best way to contact me is through LinkedIn. You should be able to just search by my name and Novartis, but my user name in LinkedIn is rdavidhall3 if you'd like to do it that way as well. That's it for me. Let me just see if there's any final questions or comments. Again, I really appreciate you all being here.
Yeah, I'll just while the questions are coming in, I'll just say, David, holy cow, thank you so much. I mean, you're a master at managing all of these different environments and tools, and it's such a blessing for the community to be able to learn from you. I definitely encourage people to reach out. If you're at RN Pharma next week, David, maybe you can connect with people there as well. But thank you so much for that session. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to post those in the chat. I do want to mention that we're going to have the survey kickoff today. When you end the meeting or leave the meeting, you should see that in your pop-up. If you don't see that survey for the digital certificate, please reach out to info@rnpharma.com or contact us on our website. We can send it to you individually. With that, I'll open up the bridge for questions. If you have any, you can go off mute or put them on the chat box, and David will stick around and answer those.
I know this is really a lot. I covered a lot of ground here, and if you have questions come up later, feel free to reach out through LinkedIn. I'll be happy to answer them. There's a lot to learn here, but all these technologies, don't be intimidated. If you've never used React before, there's great tutorials. Within a few hours, you'll be writing pretty fairly sophisticated React code, I think. So everything here, everything I've covered has a lot of really good documentation and tutorials on the web. It's easy to search for. I could have included links, but it's just as easy to ask Google.
Yeah, it's amazing to see where JavaScript has gone to. I know when I started out in the space in the early 2000s, I absolutely loved JavaScript. And one of the things I did that was pretty amazing back in those days was I added some jQuery to Sass output. And I still remember people thinking it was pretty amazing. And now with packages like HTML widgets, you can tap into it so easily. And then you can max things out doing stuff like you're doing, and you can work with different environments. It's really amazing, and it's awesome to see JavaScript at this place within the data science and scientific computing space.
Yeah, and again, I did this. I started this a while back, trying to combine writing HTML widgets, and everything moves so quickly. I just really didn't. I wanted to use some of the tools I've been using in JavaScript development, but I couldn't really find one place that could put it all together. So that really motivated me to do this workshop.
Yeah. That's fantastic. When you were starting out, was there one book or resource that you thought was pretty helpful in learning JavaScript?
Well, for learning JavaScript, it's hard to recommend. There's a lot of places you can learn that. I think any of the O'Reilly books. There's lots of places on the web. But combining that, making HTML widgets. I found there's a lot of good basic documentation at the time, but it was sort of more geared to sort of smaller kind of toy examples, or either that or integrating packages that are already developed, like but I felt like this was kind of a gap, and so I wanted to put everything in one place. And I'll probably create some additional web content after, maybe like a Medium article or something. But again, this is a public GitHub repo, so I just wanted to be able to help other people who are interested in developing more complex JavaScript-based UIs, but doing that within a framework of Shiny.
Yeah, and there's a ton of interest in this right now, especially in the submission space. There's a group that I'm part of that's trying to figure this out also with R, but then there's another group within Fuse that's the interactive data visualization submissions group that's looking at JavaScript and other things. So it's very timely in the pharma space.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Any other questions? Feel free to go off mute. Post them in the chat box.
Oh, okay. Hi, Natalie. I'm Natalia. Nice to see you. I didn't actually see the people who were participating in the workshop, but
all right. Well, David, I think we're going to go ahead and end the bridge then. Any other questions, thoughts, going once, going last?
Can I, sorry, this is Harvey here. Now, I just wanted to say I managed to run through all of the exercises with no problem as David was going through them. So that was really good. Thank you, David.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, good. I'm glad you could do that.